Today, I'm very excited to have our very special guest joining us today, Evan Ball, a buddy of mine from back in the day when we used to work on movies together back at LLP. He is now a film and TV writer, which is amazing because the last time I checked in with you, Evan, you were taking the UCLA screenwriting school or course, or what is that? Can you? Right. Hold that thought for 1 second. I just want to make sure your mic is on. I've got to check. We've got Candyland checked in, and she said we can't hear you, and that's true. You know why, Candyland? Because I was playing around with the audio. No, it's on my end definitely. So don't you worry about it. Yes. So let's see. Yes, I see why. And there you are. So I
Hey,
just want to do that intro one more time. And when this gets cut for the highlights, Jen, when you're editing this, you can start from here. What's up, everybody? I'm Aristotle Full Throttle. And I'm excited because today's very special guest is Evan Ball. We used to be buddies back in the day when we were working on LLP, on movies for like the Hallmark Channel and whatnot. And he is now a film and TV screenwriter. And the last time I checked in with you, you were taking the UCLA screenwriting course. And I want to hear all about that.
yeah, it was, there's kind of a big discussion about whether it's worth it to go to film school and whatnot, and it was actually pretty transformational for me. Like when we met, I was doing locations, and I had worked on the production side of the industry for like 8 years at that point. Really, really kind of struggling to get any writing going. Like as you know, days on set are long, and when I was doing locations, they
Indeed.
were extra long. You know, first person there, last person out, setting up things, unlocking shit. So at some point, I'm doing like 18 to 20 hour days, and I just had no ability to write.
Yeah, that's
So the idea for me, I needed time in my life to dedicate just to writing
absolutely.
without having to worry about everything else.
Yes.
Um, so I got lucky. I applied to NYU, UCLA, and USC. UCLA was my first pick, and I got in quite luckily.
That's a
Two
really
years
tough
there.
program
Yeah.
to get into now. Like I took a look online just to see what that entailed. And now this how long is this course? How long does it take? I mean, there's
Um,
several courses.
yeah. The course that I took was it's 2 years that can be extended to three. I mean, you could kind of go as long as you want, but it's planned around a 2 year course. Yeah, I think our incoming class that year was 19 people.
Wow.
So it was like a very tight cohort of people that were really dedicated. And it's funny because you spend it is not cheap. I'm happy it worked out for me because I will ultimately be able to pay off all those loans. But like for
Right.
folks who go through a program like that and then in this industry which is so like attrition based, right? It's like you got to keep trying, you got to keep trying, you got to keep pushing. For those that for one reason or another can't get in, can't break in, being strapped with now like an extra $100,000 of loans or something like that
Oof.
is just like it might ruin your life. So
Just
it
sell
was
one
not a
screenplay and you're
decision.
good. Just
Yeah.
one screenplay. It'll take care of your college, your education.
So it was not something that I took lightly. I
Yeah.
don't know if you knew this, by the way. Actually, when we were at LLP, I actually sold them a script.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really interesting because their program or their circumstances, how they like to do it, at least at the time, it's different now. They have I don't know what's going on with them now, but then
Yeah.
um, I had reached out to Amanda Phillips in development, and I was like, hey, I'm interested in kind of moving this direction and whatnot. And so she just put me on this list of people.
That's amazing.
And they sent out a ton of titles that they already liked.
Wow.
And so like you just take titles and you would pitch log lines based on the title.
That reminds me of the episode of 30 Rock where Jack Donaghy, the head of the comedy show that Liz Lemon is trying to put on each week, he's like, why don't we start with the punchlines?
Exactly.
Or like Dave Chappelle.
You would be surprised how many times you're sitting in like a writer's room or in some version of a group meeting about a story, and someone comes with that direction, and they're like, okay, well, let's start with this thing that feels extremely backward. When you're like, hey, why don't we develop characters and story or whatever, and then we can land on a joke that'll make sense within the world, and someone will be like, yo, how about somebody just throw out some jokes and we'll make it work? And you're like, whoa, hold up.
How does this even make sense?
Trying to figure this out here.
Yeah.
But everybody has different styles. So, I did my 2 years at UCLA. While I was there, I interned at Berlanti Productions, who does so many of the like DC shows and things like that. That's kind of what really got me in on them. I wanted to work on one of the DC shows.
Oh, that's awesome! Yeah.
Yeah, and while I was there, I got to kind of like do a little tourism of the different shows. Like spend a little time at Arrow, at Flash, at Legends, etc. And yeah, luckily, like Sarah Schechter over there and Carl Ogawa were like two of my biggest champions. They were fantastic for me. So when I graduated, they were really quick to try to like find me a job.
That's amazing.
So I worked on a pilot with Diablo Cody that ended up not going.
Wow.
But I was her assistant and
writer of Juno, among other great films. Yeah.
Tully, Jennifer's Body. She's a superstar. It's actually really amazing. She like, you would never know that she did anything that anyone else has seen. Like, she's super cool. Like, you expect to meet these types of people and they're, self-important and blah, blah, blah.
Does she like go grab her Oscar and be like, oh, look at this?
No. Okay. Here's the funny story. The first time the Oscar came up was sending it around. And of course, like, I'm reading it. I'm her assistant at the time. And I'm like, hey, I have a question. I don't know if I'm overstepping my boundary, but is it okay if I, like, share a note or something? And she's like, of course, go ahead. I was like, are you sure? Because I'm nobody and you have an Oscar. Are you sure?
Right.
And she was super cool about it. And she was like, yeah, I always want you to know. So that's why you're here. And I was like, oh, shit, okay. So, like, I gave it. And it was, like, some small thing. But she was like, oh, okay. And then disappeared in her office.
You were like, why don't we start with the punchlines?
Exactly. But yeah, and so it became a really fantastic working relationship, like, from day one. And
that's amazing.
Very thankful, because even though that show didn't get picked up, they at Berlanti, they really enjoyed me on that show and everything. So they put me in as a writer's assistant on season 1 of Titans when that started, which was only a couple months after we found out our show wasn't getting picked up. So
that's awesome. So
it was like boom, 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 man. That's
amazing. That's like kind of the hope and the dream, right? Like you're living the dream.
I consider myself very fortunate, because this is an industry, like, I think in life people try to act like, I have to do everything myself.
Right.
And like, you work hard, you spend all the nights, busting your ass and doing all that. But ultimately, like, it still requires other people to be there for you and like see value in you, want to pull you up. And so I got lucky that I had the kind of like combination of those two things. So yeah, they put me on that show. And then from there, they really liked me on that show, and I made several of like new really great friends on Titans. Awesome. Season 1 was such a blast to work on, and from there I got my first staff writing gig on season 1 of Stargirl.
Okay, cool.
So Stargirl, I know it just finished season 1, but we wrote that almost 2 years ago at this point. It was, our room ended 2019 in April. So we started that in like November of 2018 or something like that. So yeah, so after I got off of that show, you know, it's the jitters of like, am I gonna get a second show? Is this for real, or did I just get like this lucky thing that's gonna disappear? And by then I had agents and managers, and it's crazy because now finally, like, you spend all this time trying to convince people to read your shit, and now there's people who are like, yeah, I need more of your stuff. I want to send it to everybody in the whatever. And
that's amazing. Now
it's night and day.
Now, if you guys are just tuning in and joining us, our special guest today is Evan Ball. He's a film and TV writer. And I know Angie out there, she's actually a huge fan of the DC universe. I'm sure if she's able... We're starting a little late today, but if Angie, you want to leave a comment later for Evan, you could find him on all the platforms at Evanistics. Now, I remember you as like the cool locations guy. Come in, you know, like...
I'll take that.
Always like, you know, making sure everything's cool. Where did you, so that was kind of, I guess, a transitional period of work for you. So you grew up, you always wanted to work in film, obviously. I mean, that's where you were.
I didn't actually.
Really?
Yeah, I kind of discovered film a little later in my life. Like, I was always writing when I was younger.
Yeah.
A variety of, you know, short stories, rap songs, whatever it was, right? But I was actually a sciences kid growing up all the way through high school. And when I went into undergrad, I actually went in as a math major. I was, like, in my head, I have two uncles that work at NASA, and I was like, I'm going to try to work at NASA too.
Right.
But
what went wrong?
What went wrong? Exactly. Well, this is it, right? You get into school, and now there's so many more subjects that are at your disposal that are like really fun. So I wanted to take all these other classes, and ultimately I wanted to double major. So I went to my advisor and I was like, hey, I want a double major. You know, I think it'd be really cool to add, you know, a sociology major or history, something else. Like, I was exploring. And she was very quickly just like, hey, you know what? I hear you, but math is a very difficult subject, and we lose a lot of people who try to take on too much of a workload. So why don't you come back like junior year, and we'll talk about it, and we'll see if maybe you want to add a minor then. So this was my sophomore year of college, and very quickly I was just like, dude, like, I'm here to study what I want. Like, if I want to take on, then like, let me fail on my own terms if I'm gonna fail.
Right. Go to school. And that's one thing that I always valued. Like, I graduated with a film degree, and whether or not how far a film degree goes, I'm so glad that I did a subject. I studied a subject that I really love, and I haven't done that. Yeah.
It's and especially because, you know, once you get into upper division classes and you get to really like dive into the fun subjects that you want, school is completely different than it is in high school and stuff before. When it's not just GE, when you're not just there because you have to be, but when you're like, I actually do want to study mainland China cinema or whatever.
Right.
Like, it's fun.
Yeah.
So I basically walked out of that office and immediately undeclared because I was just like, nope, I'm here to do what I want to do. Took a bunch of film classes as part of that quarter, and ultimately did end up declaring film. So that was I graduated with a film degree. Wow. But like I said, it was something that kind of came on a little bit later. But once it hit, it was like, oh, this makes sense, because I have a billion interests. I have a ton of things, and film was a way for me to like work on a craft and development and share stories, but also, like, if I want to do a car movie because I'm into cars, I could do that. If I want to do something that's spacey, and I could do a sci-fi movie. So it was a way to like tie all my interests together and make it not feel like I'm wasting my time being into 300 different things.
That's amazing. That is heard over here, because like, for real, I spent many years as a musician and in a band, and being in a band was such a good context to create visuals, to create music, to write songs, to do all of those things, but not build rockets. I wasn't working at JPL.
But you can make a song about building rockets.
Indeed, exactly. We can
give a little love to those guys.
For real.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So it's been a fun journey, and I'm really thankful to be where I am, and it's one of those things that, like, the hustle always is there.
Right.
There's no time in which, you know, you think you're gonna make it. Like there's some point you're gonna surpass, and now it's like cool. Like now I'm here, I can just do the job. But it's not, man. It's still constantly trying to get jobs. It's still constantly like I got to work on my own stuff, but I'm working on this thing for this person, etc. So it's a grind, but man, it's doing something I love really helps with that grind.
It's true. I mean, I can relate for sure because I know that I was like in a transitional period several years ago where I wasn't quite doing the things I wanted to do, but now that I'm in LA and kind of juggling being a photographer with being an actor with sometimes playing music, not as much as I used to, but it's like I'm where I want to be doing the things I want to do, and yeah, man, and we could chat about that stuff all day. I love it. Guys, if you have, hey, Jimmy James Cordova on Instagram, if you guys have any questions for Evan Ball, let us know. And guys in the chat rooms, just keep on dropping some chats because it'll catch up to the screen. It's like way up here. Once it comes down here, you'll see it on the screen. But tell us what the writer's room is like. What is going on in that writer's room? It seems like a mystery box, as J.J. Abrams would say.
Yeah. What's up, Ricky? Yeah, so the writer's room, it plays a little differently depending on who's running it. But it's one of the most fun creative spaces. If it's not like... If it's well run and everybody gets along, it's one of the most fun creative spaces that there can be. Right. Because, you know, you're sitting around, there's a range of people who have usually like people who have been in the industry for a long time, all the way down to like newbies. And you're just seeing the ways different people try to figure out problem solving, right? Right. So it's just like creativity bouncing off the walls and bouncing back and forth between each other. That's amazing. And sometimes it's kind of like, it's kind of hard to, like when I was, the first time I was there as an assistant and I'm like taking notes, you're just trying to keep up because an idea that someone's like, well, what if we have so-and-so do this? And then immediately, like, 4 more people have, like, you see their eyes light up, and then this person has something that's going to build on, and this person, and this person. Wow. And something can just snowball really quickly into, like, a thought-out, developed idea.
Yeah. That's amazing. It seems like chaos. Like, how do you all scattered, and then are there further sessions later where you start to, like, sculpt the ideas? How does that work?
Yeah, so I guess generally what you'll get is in the first couple weeks, you'll get a lot of like broad scoping of the show, right? This is what we seek to accomplish this season. These are the characters and kind of where we want them to go. And then maybe depending on whether the showrunner has like a very specific vision, they might just kind of lay out the main like tent poles of the season. Right. Or if not, then it's just like this broad brainstorming like, okay, well, what if we go about it like this? And it can be like this first few weeks can be really amazing because it's like, you know, they'll say like, okay, let's just blue sky this. It's like anything is possible. It's all wide open. Okay. And it's just like stuff is the wildest shit is kind of bouncing back and forth. And it's the whole like it's the no consequences section of pitching in the room because pretty much anything is possible at this point. Yeah. And then you'll start narrowing down into ideas and themes and stuff that you kind of want story-wise to accomplish over the course of the season. And once you get there, then you start breaking it into episodes. And then usually you'll be working on, an episode or 2 at a time, depending on, how they're connected. Mm-hmm. But, you have support staff and you have head writers and you have people that are also meant to like track everything to make sure that all the stuff connects.
Right. That's really important too. I know there's a guy over at Star Wars, mm-hmm. and he's like in charge of the holocron in that he has to make sure that every little I is dotted and every T is crossed and that nothing steps on any other toes of the entire litany of characters and all of that stuff. Like, how hard is it to keep track? So there are people dedicated to those positions.
Yeah, I mean, within the room, a lot of times that's down to kind of the top of the top and the writer's assistant. It'll be funny because, like sometimes like we had Jeff Johns on Titans,
Right.
and he'd be away working on his other shows or working on the movies or whatever, and then he'd come in, he'd be like, all right guys, catch me up. Evan, what did we say 3 weeks ago on this thing? And I'd be like, hold up, and I have to like dive through weeks of notes and be like, oh, okay, yeah, here's where we are, and then let him go, and then we just like the conversation would roll.
Yeah.
But for something like, I mean, even on the DC shows and in your Disney example, there will be somebody that's kind of corporate side that might be like, hey, you can't use these characters because we have things set up for them for years down the line that we're starting to build toward, or there's a cartoon series that's doing this. So there's this weird kind of, it's not super encroaching all the time, but it's a little bit of story approval where you'll be like, hey, can we use these guys? Like, no, Arrow's using that right now, or they're going to use that. So a lot of that overlap means you're kind of swimming through obstacles until you find something. And like the worst part of that is when you get really excited about something because you think it's safe, and then you love it, and so you build this whole idea around it, and then they're like, oh wait, hold up, we forgot, you can't use it because it's something else.
They just pull the rug out from under you.
But it can go the other way too, where like you can be like, we just need this type of thing, and then someone's like, hey, this character is available, or this thing's available, and you're like, oh, no one's touched that yet, and then you could dive in. So it's this really, kind of back and forth sandbox thing that you're working with.
It's very delicate. It seems like there's a lot of plates in the air. Like you're just constantly spinning plates. We got a $20 donation for ACLU. Thank you for that.
Okay.
That's awesome. You got to protect those American civil liberties. This is the best we got right now.
As long as we can, man. As long as we can. They are under attack for sure.
I know. I'm like, hey, anybody remember America? Guys, remember America? Such a cool idea. Condyland says, I saw this documentary years ago about screenwriters called Tales from the Script. Are screenwriters really treated worse than anybody on set? That was the sort of resounding consensus.
So there's a difference between TV and film screenwriters, right? So depending on if you're like a huge name, if you're a huge name where as a writer you're a producer on a film, it's a little less. But for that idea is more geared toward movies, because kind of once the screenwriter hands that off, ultimately it's like that is the director's set. It's out of their control. The actors are usually paid way more than the screenwriter. Everybody, so like there's no like the screenwriter's not on set with a lot of sway unless they already have a big name or they're directing and producing or one or the other, right? TV, it's the complete opposite, because the screenwriters, the showrunner is the head screenwriter and they are in charge of the show. Right. And at that point, the director on set is a hired hand who's kind of an employee of the showrunner. Mm-hmm. So on a TV set, when you visit as the writer, you're essentially a producer.
That's cool.
So you'll go there and, the screen or the director will go get their take, do whatever. And then the director might turn to the writer and be like, hey, how's that feel for you? Is that good? And that's night and day from what it is on a movie set.
Right.
When like they just get the writer. I don't want to deal with him right now. He's going to try to like, put his own thing on it, whatever.
Interesting. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember, and I say this sometimes on the show, that because you mentioned you sort of hand off the script once it's done as a film script or screenplay, you have you've given up, like you're done writing it. So there's the movie that's written, there's the movie that's filmed or produced, and then there's the movie that's cut together. Now, how do you, what's your thought on that whole process?
Well, I think it's part of what makes cinema so unique, and it's weird because this is why people want to be auteurs, right? Why they want to be the writer and the director and the producer of everything, because they want to have like a clear, unified vision.
Yes.
But I think what we see in so Marvel, for instance, right? They are really good at having a unified vision across the whole of the franchise. Right. And Kevin Feige and the people that are in charge of that have managed to, through their process of basically running things through their control, more or less, depending on the film, have like the movies all feel the same. It feels like they're in the same franchise, and you've also gotten a lot of good films out of it. You also have other circumstances where, like, too many cooks in the kitchen can really ruin the movie.
Yeah.
So
I always get alarmed when I see like written by so and 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 so. Like it'll be like 5 names. I'm like, uh-oh.
So here's the key. You need to look at whose names are grouped together.
Right.
Because that'll show you who's working on it at one time, essentially. Right.
Okay.
So you'll get like you'll see story buys, and story buys are usually for people who did like a really early version of the draft or came up with the story concept, but the draft has like they've done a page 1 rewrite from that, or it's been pretty heavily changed from that. So then you'll see written by or a screenplay by or teleplay by or whatever, and those are the people who have like who did the most work on the script itself. Usually this doesn't count directors. Directors like in and out on a film anyway. Directors in and out get credit for writing depending on how much they do. Like if they do more than 50% of the script, I think they can legally say that they are also a writer on it. Or unless it's in their contract from the beginning.
How common is that for a film director to take a script and just sort of rewrite things here and there? Like how much is that allowed? I don't even...
Super common.
Yeah.
It's the director's movie. So once the script, I mean, look, it's a living document. They can go back to the writer at any time and say, hey, we want to work this scene or do this thing or whatever like that. It's not entirely that like the writer hands it over and then it's a wrap. But the director at any given point can change anything on any page that they want to.
Got it.
There would have to be some contractual obligation otherwise, but it's their movie. So, and often what you'll also get are situations, especially with big powerful producers, where Warner Brothers or Disney or whomever will just be like, hey, we want this changed too. So while they're technically not writing it, if they say, hey, give us a scene where Natasha and the Hulk do this thing or whatever, like they are having story input that just can't, like they're the money, you can't do anything about it.
Right. You just have to work that in. Huh. How often do you, I don't want to like put you in jeopardy, but like how often, I imagine working on a TV series like, so you worked on Teen Titans.
I worked on the Titans show that's now moving to HBO Max. That was DC Universe. Yeah. And then Stargirl. And then the most recent show I came off of is the Colin Kaepernick Netflix show.
Oh, nice.
That will be, I don't know, filming hopefully soon.
That's really cool. What was your involvement with that? Just
I was a writer on that.
Is it a documentary or is it an actual?
There's kind of the stories and the experiences he had that kind of helped him become the man that would take the knee.
Interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah. So
I find I find that story really compelling, particularly right now in today's climate when it's just like up until 2 months ago, 3 months ago, just like. Everybody was afraid to say Black Lives Matter. Everybody was afraid to say that.
It's absurd, man.
And now, like, people have suddenly discovered that Black Lives Matter. We have which is a good thing. We have a question here on Instagram. Which do you enjoy more, working with lots of new people on projects or building a tribe of people you know and trust? Or maybe a mix?
I think if I can do it ideally, so look, I'm gonna break in sports analogies here in a second. So I apologize for non-sports fans, but I think you see in sports it's very visual that you can see a team that has good chemistry.
Right.
And I think chemistry in any teamwork is really, really important. So ultimately, I do think having like a tight core of people that you've worked with over and over and over again, that you know what the other person's going to say before they say it. When someone, because you just get to talk in shorthand, you get to work and you know what the other person means when they're saying like, hey, I really want something that's a little more visceral and kind of esoteric or whatever. And so it's like, I got you. Let me break out this playlist or whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to fire on all cylinders with people who are really familiar. I mean, you saw this at LLP, right? Like, this is a whole team of people that knew how to work together, and setups, when we would go from setup to setup to setup,
quick,
we could just like fly through it.
Yeah, there was a dance to it.
Yeah, so I think, but that's at the same time, I think what's fun about having new people on board is new ideas. Like you do want to be growing and evolving all the time, and that getting out of the echo chamber really helps that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think my idea would be having my core, like you have your core DP, you have your core like couple writers you would bring back and forth between things or whatever, but you'd want to also have new fresh people that work within it. You need that balance, I think, to get, and you really need an ego that's willing to say like, hey, I'm wrong, your idea is better.
Yes. Yeah, that is so true. In the songwriting world, and having been in bands and for years being in a band with other creative people, there are moments where you're like, you have to develop that shorthand. Sometimes it depends. Sometimes it's like right away. Sometimes you're like, I know what you're thinking, and there's like no ego. But then there's some times where people are like, this idea is the best idea because it's my idea. And you're like, wait a second. Let's all take a step back and look at the thing as a whole and see how that fits. And I think that might be kind of what you're saying, is that there needs to be a respect for the actual product, I don't want to say product, but the result, the thing that you're making together should be the thing that you all have reverence for, instead of maybe having your own ideas seen. Kill your darlings, they say.
Kill your darling. I mean, it's far and away it's like I said with my initial conversation about working with Diablo Cody, right? Like, this is an Oscar winner who was willing to like hear a note from her assistant.
That's awesome.
Right. That's the people that I've worked with that don't have ego about like my idea has to be right, like far and away put out the better content.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
It's a willingness to accept, to see the thing for what it is, instead of like crowbarring people's own ideas. I mean, I have like a chip on my shoulder from a couple of experiences I've had.
Yeah, I get it, baby. I get it.
Where I'm just like, it's not the best idea just because you came up with it.
Well, there's a disassociation that has to happen too, because it's like, it's not like the story, the idea can be the idea, and it's not you. Yeah. Right. Like,
exactly.
You're here to serve the story. You are very actively here to, and I think people will know that when you get into it, like, creation and discovery happen at the same time. You're not just dictating, I think it's this and that's it. So right. Much of the writing process is you get somewhere and you're like, holy shit, it didn't occur to me before, but this guy would totally do this thing over here, not what I think he's doing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's so if that comes from you or someone else, it doesn't matter, especially if, like, if your name's on the show and one of your employees is like, hey, I have an idea and it's a better idea, you still look good. So like,
right.
Why not?
Exactly. It's your team. It should be that's being a team player. And that's another thing is, like, I worked with a drummer for like 7 years in my band, and I would come up with a riff or he would come up with a beat, and almost invariably he would come in on a different beat on whatever riff I was writing, and I'd be like, I never even pictured this riff the way you hear it
lining up. Yeah.
And now it's even better. Everything got better because
that's so cool.
Yeah. It's the same thing. It's like, it kind of triggers your creativity to hear an idea that maybe you didn't even think of. And now your brain is firing on all cylinders, and then you come up with an idea and then they hear it. So it's a dance. It's a game of tennis.
Yeah. This is ultimately why I really like writers' rooms. I think I don't want to go hardcore on it, but I do think even if I had like a movie that I was writing and directing or whatever, I think it's worth it to, especially in the early stages, get a few people together to discuss the ideas and kind of do a pre-room, because you just never know what people can come up with. Like, if you want to trust yourself to execute it, that's one thing, but the ideas that can just come off of people bouncing their creativity back and forth, like, it's not worth throwing away that valuable resource.
Indeed. I was just reminded that the captions that I put on the video are not correct. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. However, this will be pared down into a highlight video with all the best stuff and the correct captions. Yes, if you've got questions for our guest, Evan Ball, he's a TV and film writer. That's amazing. He creates this is where all the stuff starts, right? It starts in the writer's room. How much do you see it change through the process of being filmed and edited?
Oh, a ton.
Yeah.
So through production, it's interesting because, in the same way that you want to not be egotistical about like who's giving ideas in the room, that can carry on the whole way, right? Actors can bring things to the script that now, like especially in TV, when you have a writer on set that is like kind of there to do last second rewrites if need be. You know, an actor might bring something. I would probably in film, actors have a little more leeway, but again, that just depends on who's running the show. But new inspiration, new ideas can come from anywhere. Your editor can throw together a cut that completely changes the emotional context of the scene from what you intended, but it could work better than what you initially thought it was gonna be. So it's not, especially in TV where you're getting studio and network approval every step of the way for all of your scripts, and because it's serial usually, you have like future considerations to work with. You don't see too much change between script and finished product. Sometimes it might be if it's like, hey, we would totally want to shift the show this way or that way or whatever.
Right.
But I could imagine, you know, especially for something like independent films where, you know, you might have this idea and then something can totally change on set and then all this, and you're really just trying to come up with the best single product. I could see that being wildly different sometimes if the circumstances call for it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like I sent out a tweet earlier saying how you can make a crappy movie from a excellent screenplay, but is it possible to make an excellent movie from a crappy screenplay? What's your opinion on that?
The standard
and we got some more donations for the ACLU. Thank you guys very much for donating to the ACLU on Instagram. That is very important to maintain America. Thank you.
Please continue your donations. If there's anything you can do to help, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And remind me at the end, I will donate as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I'll say this. I think it is much easier for a great script to keep a crappy execution okay than for great execution to cover a terrible script. It's possible.
Right. Okay.
Right? It's possible to have a bad script that has like the pieces of a decent idea running through it, but like executed poorly. It's possible for that on set for an actor and director to get into a vibe, or several actors, and be like, hey, we really think the scene is like this, blah, blah, blah. Or for an editor to find something that's in there and say like, I know the movie thinks it's kind of going this way, but given what I have, if we cut these things out, you could do this.
Right.
Those possibilities are always there, but I think that is much more difficult than having a really good script that I don't know what I'm saying.
I follow.
Whereas if you have a really good script, it's hard to blow that. You know,
Right.
It could be poorly acted. I mean, there's a lot of things that we've seen that are like horribly acted. I mean, here's what I'll say. John Wick, for example.
Love
right?
those movies. Love them.
John Wick is the most basic script.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I will fight anybody to the death. It is a fantastic script too, because it knows its world, it knows what it's trying to achieve, and it nails it.
This is my exact contention. I was watching John Wick 3 for the first time about 2 months ago, and I was like, there's such a beauty to these movies. John Wick, the first one, is the best one, but there's a beauty to that franchise in that it is exactly what it's supposed to be. It knows exactly what it's doing, and it's doing it so well. It's doing it at the height of that. It's a very, I don't want to say meat and potatoes, but it is a streamlined series that knows exactly what it is. What's one of the more challenging aspects of being in a writer's room? Says Escape from Post.
Hey. Um, I'd say, you know, different people have different competing good ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's, I actually think being in a writer's room where the guidance is bad or the ideas are bad is fairly, as long as you can mentally get yourself there, like, okay, this is what we're doing, fine. That's actually very simple. I think it's much more difficult to be in a room where there's several competing good ideas and you're trying to figure out which way to go, because then
Right.
you have to put so much forethought or extra thought into it. Like, okay, well, if we do this good idea, that's going to lead us to blah, 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 blah further down the road. But if we do this one, blah, 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 right? And you're weighing the pluses and minuses of those. And now you're looking 2-3 episodes down the road of like, whoa, what opportunities does that give us? Well, what does that not let us do? Whatever. And that is so much more difficult than like, here's a few bad ideas, here's some mediocre ideas, and someone's like, I got it, and that one's actually the clear, right, good idea.
Yeah, isn't that funny how that usually happens? It's like, oh, well, obviously this is the best answer. Like
Yeah.
it just presents itself. It's the struggle kind of evaporates from that. Escape from Post has another question. How do you handle tackling social issues in scripts without being preachy while still raising enough awareness? That's really good, because The Watchmen just won The Watchmen won the world the other day on the Emmys.
Rightfully so, by the way.
What an excellent series. Almost I'd say close to perfect season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think avoiding being preachy, here's what I'll ultimately say. It comes down to allowing the audience to experience the whatever the social issue you want to comment on through the lens of a character and through the feeling of the characters in the film. Right? A lot of times things feel preachy when it feels out of nowhere that we're talking about this now.
Right.
Like, why would these people be saying this? It doesn't make any sense. Or why do we cut, like, if you can cut that scene out of the movie that's now like laying into the social issue, then it's a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if sometimes if it's a movie that's so blatantly about a social issue or an episode or something, you have to, you'll see people doing a lot of eye rolling almost in the first act of it, because it's like, okay, I get it, we're talking about this, blah 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 blah. Like, they're waiting for the story to start. They're waiting for something to happen to the characters, or for the characters to take some action that you care about.
Right.
So what you really want to do with social issues, at least as far as I'm discovering, right? I'm still learning about this. My goal is always to have it be, okay, here's an idea we're going to deconstruct, and we're not going to just say it's this, but we want to walk the audience through the eyes of a character, through the various kind of like pitfalls, ideas. Somebody's going to try this thing and be wrong about it, to come to discover on their own, like, hey, this might be the right way to think about this issue.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about, in recent years, the Green Book or Hidden Figures, or these ideas of
you put me on the spot here.
I know. Well, I want to say the word white savior, the term white savior.
No, there are a lot of those.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting, I think, conflict within the industry, because these are instances where I think executives at various networks or at studios or whatever are trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But it's still symptomatic of a larger culture of decision makers in Hollywood being a narrow selection of the population.
Right.
And so you just don't get enough voices in there during various steps of the process saying like, hey, this feels off. Or when you do, those people are ignored, right?
Right.
So you'll still get the circumstance where they're like, hey, we're gonna make sure we have some black people on the show, or we're gonna make sure we have some Latinx people on the show, whatever it is, right? And then when it comes to like the scene or the statement or like the white savior style story about it, and someone raises an objection, like, it's important to also listen to those people and incorporate those ideas. It's one of these things where it's like, some progress might be technically better than no progress.
Right.
But it's also, with critical thought, it's easy to see those as a further symptom of kind of like a cultural hegemony that just doesn't get why these stories should be important or what you're trying to say about them.
Yeah, and I think what Watchmen did so well was really weave in the idea of the Tulsa Massacre and how it impacted these characters and in this world, and how significant it was, and like it really was a character motivation for.
It was fascinating because like you could understand how essentially you could see culturally within the show how people could go from Tulsa in 21 to the way the police were, and how the excuse me, I forget the name of the organization, the white supremacist organization in the show.
Oh, in the show.
You could see the direct connection from A to B. You could see how Regina's grandfather character, who survived that, how that shaped his worldview and the actions that he took moving forward in life. And it all made sense in world.
Yeah.
There was... You go ahead.
Well, no, that's exactly, and I think that to your point earlier, that if it's so, I mean, the Tulsa Massacre is horrifying. It's horrible truth. It's American history, but in order to show that history, well, I was talking about this to a friend the other day because I just started getting into what's it called, Lovecraft Country. And I was watching the first episode, and I was like, this is great because it's showing a character who happens to be a black man. It's following him from, I don't know, 80 years ago, or I'm not quite sure when it takes place. But in order to be a story about a black person, a black guy in America at that time, you got to illustrate the climate. You got to illustrate what it's like. So it's really, it's so important to the story, because I think so many times we see like the Roaring '20s and everybody's happy and they're doing all that, and then they show the Summer of Love, 1968, everybody's hippie, peace, but then you cut to what else was going on during the Summer of Love, which was black people peacefully protesting and getting a fire hose on them in the streets.
Yeah.
So it's like these two different ideas of history that we often see, but
well, you know, it's white history is the only history, right? It's, in fact, that's literally the reason why I think the depiction of Tulsa in Watchmen hit so hard, because so many people didn't know about it, like live there. And this isn't a statement on those specific people. This is a statement on the structure and the policy and the things that have come into place since then to really kind of like mitigate its presence in our psyche, our psychological awareness of history.
Right.
And it's terrible.
Yeah.
You know, you get these, you know, with the MAGA folks, and you get these people who talk about, you know, people often refer to the 50s as kind of like this golden age. And as though we want to return to the values and the things about that. And it's like, that was a horribly oppressive time if you weren't like a middle-class white person.
Well, that's the joke. I think it was Dave Chappelle or something. I don't remember, but they said, you know, you ever get that question, what period in history would you like to go back to?
Yeah, exactly.
If you could time travel, I would never go back. Why would I go backward? There's no period in history where, you know, I'd feel comfortable. What are you now? You're working on the Colin Kaepernick, or you worked on it. I
finished that. Yeah.
Now, I imagine that has a lot of social awareness in that, because Colin Kaepernick is a figure of modern social awareness right now, the biggest.
Yeah, you know, it's telling some of the stories of his growing awareness.
Yeah.
You know, I think we tend to treat people, especially, you know, heroes of ours and public figures, as though they have always and will always be fully formed in the position that they are now. And I think that it's really important to understand that people grow and evolve and change, and seeing first of all, just hearing the brother speak about his stories and the things that went on with his life, and like his moments where things clicked and opened up for him, is really fascinating. He's very open-minded about kind of like where he grew up, what he experienced, both on the privilege and on the negative sides. And I think it's important to see that in people, because what I want to express through my stories, and what I wish we all understood a little bit more, is that nobody's finished. And when we look back at somebody's tweet 8 years ago and we want to like harass them for things now about it, it's like, it's okay for people to evolve, for people to be like, yeah, I was wrong then, I've grown. And hopefully even now, people who make mistakes, you want to encourage them to become better people.
Right.
Lord knows there's shit I did or said in high school and college or whatever that, like, if I had a tweet somewhere that like could come back and haunt me, like, you just like, you're a kid, you say dumb shit, and
right.
Times change and things like that. And so
these are teachable moments, not like cancel moments.
Yes.
People should sort of like sit in that. I mean, there are certain things that are egregious, but a tweet, we can work through that. We could talk through that.
Yeah.
For sure. Is this something that like, what is the thing that drives you the most about writing? What is the subject, or what's the drive? What's the main thing?
I actually am very much a social commentary guy. My dad was a sociologist as I grew up. My best friend's a sociology professor at UC Berkeley. Like, that's so much of my mind. And when I think about things, like, I always want to go toward, like, how can I deconstruct complex social issues?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Now
it's really important.
It can express itself. It can express itself in a million different ways. Like, it could be a raunchy comedy about kids. It could be like an action flick, or it could be like a hard drama. But usually that's kind of what sparks my initial idea. Is I think about like what do I want to, like, I come across some issue and I think, like, how would I like to dissect this and dive into it, and then I think usually in there, like, some characters will come and arise and be like, oh, this person might have an interesting take or path through this issue. And then it's just kind of, throwing shit at the wall until something makes sense.
Angie is she commented, she's a big DC fan. She said the 7th Cavalry is the group.
Yes.
Candyland says, I am a sociology grad student. This is interesting stuff. Indeed, it is, Candyland. I totally agree. I'm actually a big fan of social commentary in general. Escape from Post says, here's a big one. Imagine all police-centric series said today that they'll be restructuring to address the current climate. How do you do that for drama or comedy?
Like a police show? Well, okay. I think, frankly, there are two ways to go with this. There's one, either you really dive into not lionizing the police for everything they do, because in 99.9% of police shows, they're always right, even when they're breaking the law.
Right. Ice-T is always like, we don't need a warrant.
Yeah, seriously, it's like that, And I think about it, like, I'm a huge Batman fan. I've grown up with Batman my entire life.
Right.
But then, like, I think about it and I'm like, if Batman existed, I would fucking hate him.
Yes, that's
like,
true.
This is like
He's
a militia vigilante guy who thinks he could just, like, shit on people.
Yeah.
I have my friend who, by the way, is works on Lovecraft, and
nice.
Everybody watch it. It is fantastic. She says it takes place in 1955.
Thank you very much for that.
But yeah, so I think the first step is to make these characters more well-rounded. Make them people who make a lot more mistakes, and really start to acknowledge the structural but also, like, interpersonal reasons why people who are probably initially well-intending when they sign up can fall into a life where they justify poor behavior pretty easily.
Right.
And the second thing I would say is stop making them the protagonists of everything.
Interesting. And that's a good point. I'm particularly curious about The Batman, which comes out next year, because
so let's talk about that.
Yes, I'm excited to see it. But now that you bring up how kind of dreadful a character who works for the police but outside of the bounds of the law, how are we going to deal with that? Because they only filmed about a quarter of it, they said. Now, I imagine in these last few months during quarantine, they've rewritten some stuff.
Sure, but think about what we've seen so far in the early teaser, right? Everybody has that it makes sure you see the moment where Batman gets on the ground and punches this guy, and then almost hesitates and then goes fucking in way harder. This is a brutal, vicious, and are these street thugs? Are these not even supervillains?
Right. Yeah,
This is just a random guy who got hired by the Penguin because he doesn't have any other job opportunities, and he's now getting his fucking teeth shoved down his throat by Batman.
Right.
Listen, I don't know. I think Matt Reeves is really good at what he does, and this will probably be a fantastic movie. And watching Batman movies and reading Batman stories kind of my whole life, there's a catharsis you go through because you want to be the person who does the right thing, even when it's kind of hard to do it because there's these restrictions of laws and social convention and blah blah blah, and you're if I could just do the right thing,
right.
I get why that feels good, but it's also the idea of telling us that the only reason why the police can't do more right is because they have to adhere to these stupid civil liberties laws.
Yeah, we don't need a warrant.
Yeah, it's such a horribly toxic position to be holding,
Yeah. But thank you guys on Instagram for donating to the American Civil Liberties Union. We've got $50 in donations. We've got about a minute left on Instagram. We're probably going to wrap up the conversation over on twitch.tv/Aristotle Full Throttle. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining us on Instagram. This has been so much fun and productive with our guest, Evan Ball, TV film writer extraordinaire.
Getting to the extraordinary part.
We're probably going to geek out a little bit more about Batman over on Twitch if you guys want to join us over there. And if you guys want to subscribe, you could follow Evan at Evanistics, and you could follow me here on Instagram. Yeah, man, Batman. I'm always excited.
Hell yeah.
For I know Ange is also excited for the Batman, but I did hear that our buddy Robert Pattinson tested positive for the COVID.
Yeah. Frankly, it's still a movie that I want to see day one. I hope that we can return to theaters by then.
Yes.
Safely.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel safe yet, but those are the types of things that you absolutely want to see there.
Hang tight. I'm gonna call you. I can't. I've dropped the audio. I'm just gonna call you audio. Sorry. This is so I can hear you because I've got to reroute my audio.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Sorry. Go on.
All good.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I just want to see. I want to see movies in the theater again. I really miss it. And I know we've learned a lot in this COVID era about, things as they were might not necessarily be the way things have to be moving forward. But one thing I really hope doesn't disappear are, big theatrical releases.
Right.
I couldn't imagine, right now, I tried to go see Tenet this weekend at the drive-in.
I was going to ask.
And could not. First of all, I couldn't get in because we were there an hour beforehand, and still there just weren't enough spaces. But
now, how did they do that? Now everybody's 6 seats apart or something like that, or how does that?
I don't know how it was at that one. That one was supposed to be because that was at the Paramount Drive-In.
Oh right, I went there a couple weeks ago to see New Mutants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so how was that?
Yeah, it was.
We didn't get in.
It was that's the thing. The line was around the block. We lucked out because we saw the line on one of the entrances, And then we just went around the corner to get some junk food at a gas station. We were like, let's load up on some like candy.
And then you saw the other entrance.
There's the other entrance, and we were like, oh, let's hop in here. And then we managed to not cut that line, but we just found a shorter line, at a different entrance. The one complaint I had was that there were lights in a parking lot right behind the screen, so it was kind of washed out. It was a dark movie, New Mutants, so it was hard to see most of the time. But so you went and tried to see Tenet.
Tried to see Tenet there and couldn't get in. I think I went the longest possible way to get into that theater.
Yeah.
Because I was in a left-hand turn lane that was going to turn into it. So the people coming opposite us who were turning right into it, you'd get like 20 of them for maybe one of us.
Yeah.
And then we didn't go that other way that I think you're talking about. So we got kind of screwed. But I've seen a few at the Rose Bowl. They've been doing, they've had their like summer series, and seeing The Dark Knight, and I saw Creed and
nice.
Pee-wee's Playhouse and all that. And like their setup is super fun. It's easy because it's not, once you get in the Rose Bowl, you're not on like a main street or anything, so you're not waiting for lights. And yeah, it's just, it's like every other space is allowed to have a car in it. And I was just like, I'd bring my big truck and just not worry about anybody sitting in front of me. It was great. Yeah.
That's amazing. I missed the drive-in experience.
It's fun.
I haven't been to one since like 2003 or something. And then I went to one like 3 weeks ago, which was amazing. Now, you mentioned Creed just now.
Yes.
We were talking about that a little bit before the call here, or the stream. And I was saying, now that's a movie. Now this is going to tie into the theme of writing.
Let's do it.
Now that's a movie that had to like retain the heart, the spirit of the Rocky movies, yet reestablish its own heart and spirit. Now, how do you meet that challenge as a writer? Like, what are the things that you look to do to soft reboot or reboot something? Is that something you like to do, or do you like to just start fresh?
I think as a kid, right, you get to play with action figures. And when you do that, that's you're doing your own soft rebooting. You're doing your own fan fiction right there. So I think there's something probably in every writer. I don't know for a fact who has something, some franchise, some whatever that they would like to do that. Like, it would be so fun to do a James Bond film or something and be like, I get to play with the car and I get to play with the Bond action figure or whatever and tell my story. And so I would absolutely love to do that given the right circumstances.
Right.
What I think makes it so difficult is that once something becomes so big, a franchise, Bond, Star Wars, Rocky movies, whatever, it's no longer something that one person owns. Like, that's not Stallone's anymore. That is like America's.
Yeah.
Or it's the world's, right? Like, there's a full culture that's built around it. And, the bigger, the more rabid the culture, the harder it is to nail it.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, frankly, I don't get mad at the people who have had, like, difficulty with the Star Wars films or whatever. Like, sure.
Ask that too.
Do some of those go differently than I wish? Like, no, that's not how I would have done it or whatever. That's not what I'd hoped to see. But I think that is the most difficult thing in probably all of storytelling, is to reboot a franchise that has a huge fan base that knows it better than you.
Right.
That's the key. I mean, Star Wars specifically, expanded universe, a billion video games. Everybody who's watched it, everybody who's into it has seen the originals 300 times. I mean, I remember as a kid, like, I'd watch it and my parents would just yell at me because I would say every line before it came up,
Right, exactly.
That would be so hard. So yeah, man,
everything's
my
fine
guess,
here. Okay, how are you?
Exactly. Ichubata ekomis na, nevertheless.
Ichuta.
Like,
All
yes.
day.
Yeah, man. My guess would be, one, you probably need to be a super fan yourself. I think it's 10 times harder if you're a hired gun on it. And if you're like, oh, cool, it's a good opportunity for my career to take on the next Batman movie or the whatever, right? And you probably have to have something that you are super passionate about with it, right? Like, I haven't yet met Ryan Coogler, but that's my Oakland brother. I hope to meet him one day. We're gonna do some work. But he, in some of his interviews, has talked about with Creed specifically that Creed, the Rocky movies were so important for him, for him and his dad, right? It was a big father-son thing,
right?
So when he comes at making Creed, it's very apparent that it's a father-son story,
right? Yeah. Like that's the connection he has to the property, and he can illustrate that because he's got a genuine connection to that for sure.
Exactly. So I think having something like that as your guiding light probably helps you, because when it comes down to it, frankly, like a lot of it is just like, is it good?
Right.
Is it good, and does it feel like it lives in the same world as the previous entries in the franchise, right? Like I know one of my best friends is huge Star Trek guy, just huge, all the movies, all the series, whatever, and he doesn't like the new movies because they're action blockbuster films, and they're not the kind of like thinking, sociological, exploring type things that all the shows represented.
Yeah.
So it's something that feels like it's Star Trek in name, but not necessarily in that world of like the thematic elements of the world. And yet there's other people who love those movies, right?
Well, that's what I would agree with your friend. Like the thing that I love so much about Star Trek growing up is that it does address those social issues in a unique way, in a way that's like this super futuristic, like it's all of today's problems illustrated in a way that, in an abstract way. Like for instance, the old episode with, I think his name was Fred Gorson, and he played the alien with half of his face was black, half of his face was white. And I don't know if you remember that 1967 episode. But it was clearly reflecting, because in that episode, there was a distinction in the races. Like the left side of his face was white and the right side was black, and then he was an oppressed race of. It was very literal description of racism.
Quite on the nose, but yeah.
Yeah, but the things like that Star Trek was always brave enough to conquer head on, and like also dressed up in a futuristic sci-fi way. But then J.J. Abrams came along and was like, "I love Star Wars. Let's make it Star Wars." Shy Tang says hello, by the way. She says 3 hearts. Do you remember Shy?
Yeah, I mean, oh, Shy. Hey, what's up, Shy? It's been a while. Yeah, the on the nose conceit, the hard, like you said, like very literal thing, they get through so fast usually. It's usually in the first 5-6 minutes of the episode. They're like, okay, here's the premise.
Right.
And you'll before your first commercial break, we got to give you this premise. Yep. And the premise is going to be like, oh, okay, we're talking about this. But then it allows the entire rest of the episode to explore the nuances of that.
Right.
And that's what's so fascinating. And, again, like with the Star Trek movies, I don't begrudge that. Like, while that's not what I would do, I get somebody at a studio was like, we want this to be a fucking hit. You know what the type of movies that are hits right now? Marvel movies. Mm-hmm. And so, cool. Like, someone gets hired to do that job and they do that job. Great. Again, maybe that's not what you love when you're watching the shows, but that's ultimately what it is. And I think, not to be too apologetic, but I think we tend to forget when we're ripping on, JJ for Star Wars or Zach for DC or whatever like that, which, I definitely have my critiques of those films as well. And I think it's valid to have critiques and to talk about that. But when people like bash a person so hard about it, like you forget it's a whole ecosystem, especially like the bigger the franchise, the more there's a massive ecosystem of a ton of execs and a ton of people, like just top to bottom, that are involved and like all kind of like tearing to try like pulling at it to try to make it be one thing or the other.
Yeah.
And you can see it in a lot of these films. You can see the like
It's just
18
being
cooks in the
pulled.
kitchen, and they're like, "This is what we got," and it's just like,
We tried to make everyone involved happy, and now the product is like this sort of
there's no unified vision.
Yeah, it becomes an abomination almost.
So it's again that is the most difficult thing to do, I think, in all of TV and movie making.
For sure. The sun is wrapping around to this side of the building, and once that happens, this room turns into a bit of a greenhouse. But so I might melt before your eyes. But I do have a couple more questions for you.
Yeah, let's roll.
And thank you so much for being a guest. This is awesome, Evan Ball. If you guys are just tuning in, he's
man. I'm happy to just catch up with you, bro.
Likewise, dude. It's been a minute. It's been a minute.
Absolutely.
And it's a different world we're living in right now. It's crazy.
No doubt.
What have you been up to just like most recently? Are you working from home, or are you like what's up next?
Yeah. So I'm working from home. I have two development gigs that I'm working on right now. One, I'm adapting a book, and another one is kind of like a historical piece. So fortunately for me, work-wise, I've not been too hurt by the COVID world. I mean, like, nobody's going in any office anymore or anything like that. So, things have moved to Zoom for whatever meetings and stuff like that. It's actually it saved me gas on taking your general meetings with execs around the town and all that. But
it's kind of a proof of concept that you don't have to drive across town for for a meeting.
Like,
sometimes.
why would you do that anymore if you didn't have to?
Right.
I mean, there are definite reasons. Like, I personally would still love to have a physical writer's room. I think there's something about allowing the boredom to let people's minds kind of wander that really helps. That when you're on a Zoom call, you feel like you got to be kind of on top of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like most of these things, it's what people always say. Like, you could have sent that in an email. Exactly. Right? Like, why do we need to hop on a call for that? You could have just sent me that in an email. Well, now so many of the in-person things are like, we could have just done that over Zoom.
Yeah, that's true.
Or whatever of choice.
But, a lot of people work differently, I've noticed, and sometimes it's nice to be a little bit flexible about that. Sometimes people are just like, they need to say the thing and look at you and say the thing, and sometimes people can write it out better, the idea. But, there's all different ways of working.
Yeah, you don't gotta, I mean, look, I am a very physical writer, expressionist type person.
Yeah.
When I'm like, me writing at home is like me doing pull-ups in between scenes because I'm like, I don't know how to start this next scene, or going on a walk, or taking an audio note and talking out the dialogue because it doesn't sound right, or like it doesn't look right until I can hear it right.
Right.
And so like people think I'm on phone calls all the time because I'm just like walking up and down the street talking out random dialogue of different characters.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a very external expressive person. So like just sitting here staring at the screen is really slow for me unless I do the other stuff first. And then it's like, oh, cool. Now then I can go and kind of like get moving.
Got you. Do you have like a set schedule, or is it just whenever it happens, whenever the idea comes, that you're going to sit down and...
The thing that's most important to my schedule is to do a little bit every day, and I try to not put too much pressure unless I'm under deadline. I try not to put too much pressure on how much gets accomplished each day. I know personally, the earlier I start, the better. So when I'm what I'll find is when I'm starting working on something, it'll be slow. It'll be, like an hour or two, maybe sometimes it's only 30 minutes for the first few days, because I'll just go, then I'll get really stuck, then I'll get frustrated, then I'll walk around or whatever, do something like that. But usually after a few days, I'll start getting into a rhythm, and now my brain's kind of primed for it. And then I find myself starting earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier in the day, because now it's like it's always running in the background. So as soon as I'm up, I'm kind of like, I want to get it out now before I lose it, and I want to keep it rolling, So that's generally kind of how it works with me.
Well, the Ricky Elliott says sometimes you got to take a break and swing some Nerf swords. Is that...
Yes. Yes, you do.
Fair enough. I mean, I don't know what that means, but I agree. But, no, I bet that you've just got to like just throw yourself into it physically at some point. I mean,
look, whatever works for different people. I think the key thing is people tend to think that like the writer's block is not supposed to be part of it.
right.
That like it should be easy to get through all your scenes and figure out the story, and I've
Is
just
that a
found
real
that to be
thing?
completely opposite. Dude, I have times I'm like, I've literally had times I spent 2 weeks trying to bang through the idea of a story.
Yeah.
Where I just I have the general idea, but something about it's not working. I don't know why, and like drive myself fucking miserable. Well, what if about not that? What and just like no matter what it is, and then eventually it'll just click. But it's like you got to keep going. You got to keep trying is the thing.
Right. That makes
And
sense.
usually, like, well, when you know it's hard, you know the payoff's gonna be good, whatever it is. And then when that thing hits, and you're like, how did I fucking miss that this whole time? Whatever. Then it feels great, and then you can get going a little bit and you ride that. But those things only come if you keep at it.
Yeah.
If you stop and if you fall off for a few days, if you fall off for a couple weeks or whatever, it's always that much harder to pick back up. So even if it's just like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna write like 3 sentences today. I don't care what it is. I just got to get 3 sentences about this topic out.
Yeah.
That day is drastically preferable to not doing anything that day.
Right. That's fair. Just during quarantine, personally, I feel like I need something to show for every day. Just as someone who's worked in different creative fields, I'm like, I need to do one thing a day to feel creatively satisfied. And I definitely.
How has it affected?
Hmm?
My bad. I was say, how has it affected your photography? I mean, there's like less opportunity to really go out and interact with people and do things like that. How is that kind of?
Thankfully, I've been doing some photography lately, which has been good, and that's been sort of re-greasing those wheels. And I've been spending a lot of time at night editing those photos. So like at night, I spend a couple hours just sitting there and just edit, and like hopefully at the end of this, like it can have some kind of photo album book or something like that.
That'd be dope.
Yeah. I'm kind of working toward that. That's in the back of my mind as I'm editing, and just kind of putting 1 or 2 photos to the side every day, just so that later on I can revisit them and see if they'll go.
Is there a theme for the book?
Not
It
yet.
doesn't have to be.
Not yet. It's just
Sometimes that's what you find in the collection once you narrow it to kind of the things you like. You're like, oh yeah, it is about this kind of.
that's a question I have for you, actually. Do you have like a bunch of random ideas? So in songwriting, this was a bit of a process with me and my bandmates. We would like have random ideas. We would just like, it would spitball, just jam for a minute. And then we'd have like a couple random ideas. And then we were like, oh, remember that random idea we had last week? Why don't we just glue that to this thing and see what happens? Do you find it writing similar?
Oh yeah. The way, shape, and kind of delivery system of any idea can come really from anywhere. And so much of, like anytime I think of something, this is why I do audio notes a lot. I just want to, it cements it further in my brain if I just talk it out and hear it. So it is quite consistent that whatever the finished idea of whatever thing is a super hodgepodge of things that I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember from a long time ago there was this, and then I talked to so-and-so yesterday about this, and that actually makes these 3 things finally work, and then you could start going on it. It's again, it's so much of it is discovery in the process that makes it, and I think that's part of the fun of it. I feel like even though I'm kind of doing the work to type and to think and to talk, it's also a little bit like exploring. It's like traveling a bit. You're traveling through the world of the ideas and kind of seeing what stands out to you. You're like, oh yeah, the Colosseum's really cool, but you know what? Big Ben actually makes more sense right here. So it's a lot of fun that way.
I'm just so fascinated by that whole process. Like, I guess when you're working on a TV series, you have the tent poles that you need to hit throughout the series, But do you ever find yourself at the Coliseum as opposed to the Big Ben, and then like kind of explore that and abandon any of those tent poles, or do you always have to come back to the tent pole?
In an ideal circumstance, the best idea always wins, right? So if, maybe the tent poles are laid out like this. First of all, it is very common for those tent poles to change over the course of a season. That's for sure. Because, for example, Arrow, right? I think they've been pretty open about the fact that Felicity was not going to be as big of a character initially. But people liked her. People liked what's going on between her and Oliver. And now she's, major lead of the show and all that. And so there are a lot of elements, whether it's audience response, whether it's what people in the room are responding to, what you're excited about, that can change those tent poles and change the direction of the show at any given time.
Got it.
The thing that I think that I personally really like about it is when an idea is so good that you can't even entertain anything else. That's pretty rare, but sometimes it's we were talking about earlier. Someone comes up with an idea or something that's just okay, everybody's just engaged, and now we want to follow this to the end because there's so much that could come from that. It's so juicy,
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you find it hard to finish or abandon a story, to wrap up a story, wrap up a TV series? Do you find that taking all of those storylines and kind of having them resolve and make sense, is that a challenge? Because I know TV writing is a little different in that you want to keep sort of opening up the different worlds of the characters, right? Is that?
Yeah. So the main place. So that makes more that lands harder. That is a more difficult task in a film or at a series finale, right?
Right.
Where
that's what
everything,
I mean.
Because like you said, in TV you are trying to plant as many seeds and allow yourself so much maneuverability as possible, especially at the end of that's why all the seasons end with really vague cliffhangers, because they kind of just want to give themselves a wide breadth of we can still basically do anything next season, right?
Right.
But yeah, trying to tie off things and making a series or even a movie at the end feel like you knew what you were doing at the beginning,
right,
is super difficult.
Lost.
And way more difficult for TV than a movie, because you're writing a movie not in one sitting, but at one time, right, over the course of a year or whatever it is. You can go back, right? So a lot of times you'll write something that's so good at the end, you're like, fuck, I just need to make this work better. So you just go back in the script and change details about how things, go earlier in the script. And writing a single unit story like a movie, it's all back and forth all the time.
Yeah.
It's, oh, I had this really good idea that's in Act 1. I want to make sure that pays off here. Or I had this thing that makes so much more sense now at late Act 2. Well, let's sprinkle some in Act 1 and Act 2 and whatever, so it can all lay out right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You can't do that in television.
Yeah, because you've already committed episodes that have aired, and now you've got to they're sort of set in stone at that point.
So I think that's why you see surprises and revisionist things, that things come out like that toward the end of a series, when someone's like, hey, you remember that thing you said a long time ago? Well, I interpreted it this way, and that's why I acted the way I did, or whatever. Because it's attempts to try to make things that probably weren't going in the direction that you ended up in,
right,
kind of come back around and make sense. And it's, unfortunately, that's just kind of how it works with the medium. There's not, if you could go back and rewrite and reshoot episodes, you absolutely would. But you can't. That is a series finale of a serial show, a highly serialized show, is probably the most difficult thing in the world to write. Right. Or even, the episodes building up to it, that final season.
Well, I mean, we saw that with Game of Thrones. There was some difficulty there.
Absolutely.
Lost is notorious for sort of creating all of these different threads and then sort of abandoning them. But I have this...
Well, it's tough too. Let me
go ahead.
One more thing on that. It's tough because along the way, the incentive is to keep the threads open.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think if it was a single even writer's room just thinking about what they cared about, you would probably close off threads along the way as you realize they were becoming useless.
Right.
But when you're thinking about, what's the audience think, when you're thinking about, like, do the studio execs really like the polar bear thing that we put in the pilot, whatever, right? You always want to keep them open until you are now forced to close them. And that's why so many things get left hanging.
Yeah.
Like you said, Lost in Game of Thrones has, okay, so Game of Thrones was the cross section of a million threads and a rabid fan base that knows it better than you do.
Yeah.
So,
and
like,
also the previous seasons being based on existing
books.
Material.
Yeah.
And then these Benioff and Weiss sort of writing for TV for those last couple seasons. Yeah.
Very, very, very difficult. Again, like, I don't I do not begrudge anybody that difficult
We want
task.
Evan Ball to do the new the prequel for Game of Thrones. Let's get that hashtag going.
Yeah, I would love to be on that show. That'd be so fun.
I know that they shot it. They shot a pilot episode of a prequel. There were supposed to be 2 spin-offs, and they shot a pilot for the prequel. But my last question for you, why do you think The Mandalorian works as opposed to the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, which arguably doesn't work, and I would argue that it doesn't work?
Primarily, it's because it's a simple story about a single character. So they can, it's about Baby Yoda and stuff too, but it's just like, it lives in the lore, but it's so basic. It's, here's this Mandalorian, he finds this baby, he's got to figure out what to do with his baby. Yeah. That's it. Other people are trying to get the baby. That's so basic. So then
I would like to see the baby.
Seriously, like, it is so simple that even if, like, some episodes are better than others or whatever, like, you buy into the conceit, you understand what it's about, you care about the character, it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, you get to just live in like, cool Star Wars again without having to service 20 different characters, without having to, like, be forced into, okay, we need to have X amount of massive fight scenes or whatever. We got to have the epic battle scene. Like, you kind of, and, Jon Favreau apparently was very loose on, like, hey, what do you want to do with this episode?
Right.
And so people got to bring what they want to it, but the thread was so easy to follow, right? It was just like, all right, we got to get him from A to B with this baby, and figure out what to do.
That makes sense. I mean, there's the overarching storyline, and then every episode is just a very simple story that they need to, with a beginning, middle, and end. Yeah.
And it's detached enough from the Skywalker saga. 30 years of watching Skywalker stories and being like, well, I know Luke would have done this. He wouldn't have done that. Right. He would have done this.
That we could discuss all day long, I'm sure. Like, and I definitely want to have you back to talk to more Star Wars and stuff. Your insight is very valuable, and I appreciate. Man, I've seen you come a long way. We were working together on those sets, and last I saw you, we were talking about how you were going to start this writing course, this writing school, and now you're doing it, man. You're living the dream, and I'm happy for you, man.
It's been a long ride, and it's weird. I still have some people who are like, man, it feels like you came up overnight. You were an intern, and then a couple years later you're a writer, and I'm like, whoa,
you're hustling, like, man. It's good.
This,
that
really built up to this point.
Fair.
So, super thankful, and like I'm happy. I'm just happy to be happy, man. I'm happy to be doing something that I love, like I said before, and it's been so great catching up with you. We're gonna absolutely have to do it again.
Yes, definitely.
There's so much more to talk about.
There really is, and we would definitely. The Ricky Elliott says Mandalorian has a vision. The sequel films did not, and I tend to agree with that.
A unified vision, clearly.
Yeah, it's. Going into a show, just real briefly, I guess, because I'm so fascinated by your insight on this. But like, do you need like a complete vision, or can you sort of paw your way through it from the start without any sort of tent poles in mind? Can you start with a pilot without any, like an open-ended pilot, say?
A pilot should give you clear enough. Okay, so let's talk about the Mandalorian pilot and Lost, for example, right? Lost is on its own one of the best pilots of all time.
Yeah.
But it's one of the best pilots of all time with a very basic question for the episode, right? That doesn't provide a direction. The question is very clearly like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
That's really it.
Yeah.
So that could go in any fucking direction, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at, like we talked about John Wick, if you look at The Mandalorian, right, it's very clearly kind of like, I have to figure out this specific thing in this direction.
Gotcha. Like Breaking Bad. There was
yeah, and I think that you don't need all the tent poles to answer your question. I don't think you need all the tent poles. I think it's nice to have an ending in mind if you know that. But I think what you need is clarity and direction and clarity. And Star Wars, the new Star Wars trilogy, really suffered from one. I think The Force Awakens was so much of like what we've seen before that it didn't provide direction coming out of it and like what comes next. And that was intentional, right? Because Disney's plan was to let different people helm the different movies. But that ended up biting him in the ass because like some of the things that were set up in that and like little subplot directions didn't pay off when the second movie wanted to do completely different things. Whereas if that had a clear direction for the main thread, right? And I mean like hyper clarity. I don't mean just like, we want to know about Rey's background,
right? But
like, think about Luke, for example, in the original one. We didn't care about his background until the second movie.
That's
right.
True.
Like,
yeah,
his background was
farm boy. Yeah,
you know, like, you want to be a hero. You want to get off your rock. You want to be a hero, and you want to join this this rebellion because you want to feel like you have purpose in the world, right? That is why that movie, one, makes all the sense in the world,
right? And
then two, going out of that into the next film, we get who Luke is. We understand all of his behavior moving forward because we get what he's about. We get what everyone else is about. And they didn't, while they introduced new wrinkles like Darth is your dad in the second movie or whatever, it didn't change what Luke was after, which was to like feel importance in his life and be an important person in a matter of like in the rebellion, right? He wanted to have do a service almost, right? Yeah. And as that became the Jedi and as that became the rebellion, like he had such clarity and direction.
Yeah. Yeah, and each movie they just had such a distinct new motivation, each character, which kept it fascinating. And I think that, I don't know, do you think that Rey sort of lost that? She was just always like, who are my parents? Who are my parents? Who are my parents? Like three times in a row.
You know, it didn't evolve. For one, that was kind of the key thing of the direction twist that the series took, right? Yeah. Because if you set that up as her drive is like, I need to find out who my parents are, right? Which is essentially like, I need to find out if I matter and why I matter in the world.
Right. Yeah.
Then you want to provide an uncomfortable answer earlier, so she has to cope with that and rechange her mindset about what she's looking for. Right.
Yeah. And change our mind about the whole thing too, I think. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, I do think that's what The Last Jedi tried to do with like, you're a nobody, like your parents are just losers or whatever, right? It really tried that, but then they didn't stick with that. And I think I get it. That was a departure from, you know, Han and Maz Kanata sitting there, and she's like, "Oh, you know who her parents are?" And he's like, you know, whatever." Like,
yeah,
it was very clear that Han knew specifically who her parents were.
they
And
dropped in a bunch of
to be like,
clues. Yeah,
yeah. So that really hurt that series and made Rey repeat the question over and over again because they were fighting over what the answer was.
yeah,
Versus if it was, I think if I don't know, I'm speculating at this point, but I think if the dictation from Disney when they handed it over to Ryan in The Last Jedi was like, hey, so she's a Palpatine and you need to figure out how she's going to cope with that.
Right.
We're open to ideas, but like that's what the answer is.
yeah.
Then I think that movie goes differently, right? Whereas it probably landed on that later.
Mm-hmm.
Once Snoke was dead and now there's no main villain for the series, and it's like, okay,
Right.
now what? Yeah.
Yeah, that seemed to be like the threads were opened, then closed, then reopened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, with people who are like Star Wars fans are so savvy in the world of Star Wars. Yeah. So it's a really, and this isn't on the fans. I'm not saying this is on the fans, but I'm saying it is. You have to take so much extra care when working on that to be aware of the fact that these fans are super savvy and they're going to read through every single line. They're going to look at the script. They're going to look at it frame by frame. If you look one thing, if there's a hint in one frame somewhere in some film, that hint lasts forever.
Right.
You can't just walk away from that the way you could, you know, even in the 90s, right? It was so much easier to just be like, we kind of wanted to go this way with the sequel.
Right.
Like that wasn't the culture then. The culture now is like micro-examination and all that. And that's
true.
Completely different world.
That's right. You get like Batman Returns versus Batman Forever, and they're sequels, but they're just so
Kinda,
like
yeah.
Yeah. They're just
It's
totally
like, I'm cool. I'm happy to see another Batman film, whatever. Like
exactly. There was something weird about that. I always say that like when I was a kid, we paid to see crappy sequels, and we hated and we liked it.
Yeah.
like now we want the movie to be better than the last one we saw, which was such a rarity when I was coming up, which is you know. So guess what? The sequel, when you come back, it's going to be even better.
Yes.
Than this time. But
we shall strive to overachieve.
It's going to be hard to top, man. This was great. If you guys want to follow Evan, you can go to Evanistics on all the things, Twitter and Instagram. He's a writer for film and TV. And yeah, man, this is great.
Man.
It's so easy to talk to you, and it's so much fun. And let's talk soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one, brother.
All right, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm Aristotle, your bro with the fro, and I'll see you tomorrow.